Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the FSMA Presents podcast. Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Kris Putnam Walkerly, and she's the author of Delusional Altruism. And I think, Kris, you and I first encountered each other on a panel that was organized by the Society for International Development, and the topic was on the decolonization of international aid and international development. And then we've just sort of been keeping in touch loosely, mostly via LinkedIn. But I think some of the articles that you've been posting and some of the topics that you've been raising, particularly on how philanthropy shifted during COVID and what we could do to keep, what positive changes we could keep moving forward in what I will say optimistically a post-COVID era. And so some of those really also resonated with me as well. So we've been trying to keep this topic of conversation of what things can change, how can we continue to make small steps towards decolonization of international development. And I have to say that there were a few that really resonated with me. One was the one that you posted about strategic friction and how we overcomplicate the strategic planning process. Because when we were thinking about how to do our own strategic planning, I sent myself down a rabbit hole of looking at as many possible strategic frameworks that were available, and then sort of said, you know, in the time that you spent researching which one is the best, you probably could have designed some very clear goals and outcomes and activities. So that one was particularly resonated with me. But I think also when I did actually pick up your book as well, in the very first chapter, you touched on something that I think a lot of executive directors, a lot of NGOs are feeling right now, which is the reluctance of donors to fund general operating support and how that can really restrict an organization and the funder's ability to achieve results. And so those were the two big ones that really resonated with me. But before we get into the conversation, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and just give a quick background.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. My name is Kris Putnam Walkerly. I am president of Putnam Consulting Group, which is a philanthropy consultancy and advisory firm. So I primarily advise ultra high net worth donors and leaders of grant making foundations in all aspects of their giving. So starting from, gee, we have a lot of money, I think we want to give back. Like, what does that mean? How do we do that? I never thought I'd have this much money in my lifetime. How can I make a difference? To, established foundations, large foundations, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation, and others, some of the Giving Pledge pledgers, and really helping them think through like what impact do we want to have, what kind of difference do we want to make, and given where we are today, what are the steps we need to take to be able to make those changes. So I, advise and coach philanthropy leaders and facilitate a lot of strategic planning.
Okay, so you've got a lot of experience in this area. So what was really the inspiration for the book, and how did all of this experience that you just mentioned, working with all of these philanthropists or high net worth individuals, lead you to some of these conclusions, or what were the patterns that you started to see?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I've been advising funders and donors for over 20 years. And it was really seeing the same patterns and the same issues appearing over and over again, and recognizing that a lot of times, I think donors, philanthropists, for the most part, are genuine in their altruism. They genuinely want to make a difference, change the world, change their community, leave the world a better place than they entered it, but are delusional in the sense of they're often getting in their own way and preventing themselves from having the impact that they want to have. And often they don't even realize that's happening. And so the title is intentionally provocative, delusional altruism, just to get people thinking a little bit differently. But it's really not about like blaming and shaming. It's really about just helping all of us recognize the mistakes that we inadvertently make on the path to trying to do the right thing. I mean, you just described your strategic planning process, and you weren't trying to waste time, right? You were trying to get it right. But in your effort to get it right, you kind of got caught up in all these frameworks and processes and ended up, probably wasting a little bit of time. So I really wrote the book to help funders recognize how we all make these mistakes. It's nothing to feel bad about, but just to kind of recognize these patterns and offer very practical tips as to what we can do differently to be more transformational in our giving, and quite frankly, to increase the speed of the impact that we're trying to have.
Yeah, I think we saw with the most recent pandemic, speed is important, especially when people's lives are on the line. And also, I think, the pandemic, I think, also highlighted for a lot of us, some things just weren't really working.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be a missed opportunity to not have some real conversation about how we could make some of those changes. So again, one of the things that really resonated with me was about the challenges in securing funding for general operations and personnel specifically. Funders are really, really pro project funding. And want to fund specific projects that have specific outcomes. And I think one of the areas where there's a disconnect is it's oftentimes the people and the personnel that make those programs successful. And you can't really have a successful project without those personnel. So are you seeing any signs recently that attitudes are starting to change or shift in any way in this area?
I am seeing hopeful signs, not quite as dramatic as I would like, but and no, just to make sure all your listeners understand, when we refer to general operating support, that's really funding for a nonprofit organization that's for whatever they feel that is important for them to work on, right? So it's money. You say, hey, leader of nonprofit, here's $50,000, $5,000, $500, whatever it is. We trust you. We believe in you. We believe that you know the best way to spend this. So you come, let us know in a year how you spent it, right? As opposed to what you said before, which is more common, project specific support, which is, here's $50,000. You can only use it on this project to, increase access for young people to go to kindergarten or, whatever the program is. And even worse, as you alluded to, donors often have a lot of restrictions on exactly what the money can be used for and what it cannot be used for. And as you said, a lot of times donors don't want the money to go toward personnel. They don't want the money to go toward staff. And, this is delusional because, exactly to your point, like, who do you think is delivering the programs? Like robots, right? It's people. And I know a lot of donors that, refuse to fund the personnel costs, but they'll fund the program. So like literally they'll try to fund a tutoring program, but not actually fund the people providing the tutoring services. Or they'll fund an advocacy effort, but not fund the advocates. And so you have to wonder, like, what's left, right? After you remove the people, it's kind of hard to imagine why you think anything will get accomplished, because, philanthropy this is all about people. Like, we're people are running organizations to help other people. Board members are people, business owners are people, we're all people. And it's really critically important to support that talent and to support that talent at the true cost of what it really costs to hire high quality personnel and what it costs to keep them: professional development, engagement, ability to attend conferences and learn and network, benefits, and to offer multi-years of funding. Because, too often, if you're hiring, you're the leader of a nonprofit organization, and if you're trying to launch a new initiative that might take the next 5 years, well, you could find the best person, but if you don't have 5 years of funding, it's really tricky and a little bit scary to offer somebody a 1-year gig, right? They have to leave their job, take a lot of risks to do that. If you only have 1 year of funding, when what you really need them to do is 5 years, think ahead 5 years, plan 5 years, build relationships for 5 years. And so, again, it's an example of funders being delusional in their altruism because they think they're being prudent. They think they're, being kind of conservative with their money. Let's see how the first year goes, and then we'll dole out another year. But you're really shooting yourself in the foot because you're preventing that nonprofit from hiring the best talent and thoughtfully planning ahead and kind of executing against a 5-year plan. So I think, donors really need to think about, what does it take for the impact that we want to see be created? And I think it takes, top talent, well-organized nonprofits, a great strategic plan, a fabulous board of directors, great financial management systems, great fund development systems, communication apparatus, appropriate technology, like all of these things, right? all of these things cost money. They cost money for business owners, they cost money for nonprofits. And donors really need to recognize the importance of investing in those kinds of aspects of a nonprofit so that it can be strong, therefore it can deliver more results.
Well, and I think a lot of them, maybe came from the private sector or ran their own companies. And I'm sure that during some of those meetings, when they were informing new initiatives or new business units in their own work, there were probably key resources that they knew those results wouldn't be achieved without, and personnel being one of those. I think it's also so interesting how we often ask nonprofit staff to work on some of the most difficult challenges that governments aren't solving, right? Governments aren't solving them. And we ask them to work on the most difficult challenge with the shortest contracts and the smallest amount of benefits possible.
Yes.
So that has always felt just a misalignment and maybe a little delusional as well. And I think just calling out, because we talked a little about how we'd like to see things happen faster. And I do want to be really clear. I mean, the grant making process and getting the funds into the hands of the organization, because we know that good program implementation with community involvement takes time. Mm-hmm. And so we know that might be slow to see results because people are involved, because things are messy. So getting the money out faster is one variable that we can control, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's especially relevant for global organizations who might be working on different country projects where outside of Western culture, there is a different concept of time and emphasis on time and just how quickly things move, what kinds of technology are available to different community stakeholders or local governments. So I do want to be really clear, we are not necessarily saying we can speed up the project implementation part of when they can see results, but anywhere that we can try to shorten that time frame that we can't, those variables we can control, I think that's really where we should be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we've talked a little bit on time. So you also touched upon a few of the biggest time wasters you found in philanthropy over the years. I'd love for you to just share a bit of those. I've already shared mine. I probably spent maybe 4 to 6 weeks doing all that research on those strategic planning frameworks. I'm happy with the one that we chose at the end, but did I probably really need to burn all that time? No, not really.
But now you're a strategic framework expert. So there you go.
Someone did ask me, and I sent them the whole lot of what I had done and some of the books and frameworks that I had. Yeah, that's true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time, there's so many time wasters, and I really think, one of the most important things that truly all of us can do, whether you're an NGO, whether you're a funder, a business, an independent, consultant like myself, is really think about what's most important for you to focus on, and like, how can you eliminate almost everything else? And I mean that literally, like, stop doing it, delegate it, dramatically shorten it, because I think we just get too caught up in the clutter of our lives and our businesses and our organizations. And I really believe it's almost like a fear-based problem. Like, if we can busy ourselves with all this stuff, we don't have to deal with the reality of what we're working on. Like or it's like you wrap yourself in like a data blanket, you wrap yourself, you kind of are wrapping yourself in like a strategic planning framework blanket. Like, it's almost like, if I do all this research, then, somewhere down the line, I'll have the confidence that I'm doing the right thing based on perhaps fear of like, I might not be getting this right. But I think if we can kind of eliminate all of these, whether it's your overflowing inbox, whether it's your back-to-back calendar of events that doesn't give you any time to breathe, whether it's, doing a lot of data gathering before you do strategic planning, or looking at every framework possible, or, in my case, having piles and piles of reports that I think I'm going to read someday, whatever it is, like we kind of surround ourselves with clutter. And I think it really slows us down and allows us to waste time and resources, but it's all like, none of it feels wrong. Like, it doesn't feel like we're wasting, right? Because it's important to read reports. You have to check your email. Who could argue with reviewing different frameworks for strategic planning? You know what I mean? It all sounds like okay, but it's actually wasting a lot of time. And I do really believe that, perhaps the most important thing all of us can do is have clarity on what we're trying to accomplish, like have clarity on our strategy. Strategy is really thinking about, who do we want to be a year from now? What kind of impact do we want to be having in 12 months or 3 years? What kind of philanthropist do I want to be? What kind of philanthropic family do we want to become? And in a time limited, like, you might have 20-year vision, big, hairy, audacious goal, but what is the next year going to look like, right? Because it's hard to plan out more than a year. And then looking really clearly at where you are today. Well, here's where we want to be a year from now. We want to be a philanthropic family that has clarity on its mission, vision, values, and has begun identifying different causes to support and has begun making grants. And we want to learn as we go and build relationships with grantees. Well, where are we today? Nowhere, right? Like today we have a pile of money in the bank. Like we don't even have a foundation. So then you think about, well, what are the top 3 things to focus on? Like, what are your top priorities to shift you from where you are today, just honestly where you are, to where you want to be in a year or 2 as quickly as possible? What is that 80% of effort that's really going to, 20% of effort that's going to drive the 80% of results? What are the most important things to move on next? And then hold yourself accountable to doing those. Assign people to be responsible for each of those top priorities and move on them. And truly force yourself every 2 weeks to share updates and progress and get help so that you're immediately, if you're an individual or you're a 500-person organization, if you're a nonprofit or you're a funder, you immediately move into beginning to implement those top priorities and you begin to see the results quickly. And then also think about, what do we stop doing? Because you can't do it all. So how do you eliminate the things that are no longer helping you achieve that strategy? So there might be other activities you're doing, but if they're not helping you achieve your goals, then, how can you stop doing them? And to me, that's kind of the overarching, I would say, most important thing to do around preventing yourself from wasting time. And I certainly have a lot of other suggestions of things that funders can stop doing as well.
I think it was so funny because one of the fears that I had about choosing the strategic planning framework was all of the others that I had experienced in my career previously were so much more complicated. And it was really this fear of, well, if ours looks too simple, it won't be taken as seriously. When really, I actually would like to remove all the clutter and let's just really focus on something that's very agile, because we were also developing our strategic plan during 2021. So it was sort of like, well, even if we had a really solid 3-year strategy when our organization was founded in 2020, I'm willing to bet we probably would have thrown it out by June of 2020, because a lot of our original activities were around in-person events and networking. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also about being flexible. You can plan, and it's good to have a plan and it's good to set priorities, but also being flexible when a lot of those assumptions shift. And if you don't have an agile process, you can't change the ship change the direction of the ship as easily. Mm-hmm. And I think what's also interesting is sometimes we see from funders, when you talked about priorities, this just came to mind. Sometimes we see from funders, their priorities are sometimes competing or contradictory, or they are changing them a lot. So we see a lot of trends happening in our sector in particular on what is the trendiest thing, what's the new shiny thing that funders are talking about and after, and then everyone goes that direction to follow the money. Luckily, right now, the newest trend is climate change, and I'm a proponent of chasing climate change money, yes, and really bringing that to the forefront of our conversation in a lot of ways. But I have seen this where everybody is sort of constantly changing based on some of the donors' whims, I'll say. It may not feel whimsical, but to grantees, it does sometimes, because there's sometimes they don't communicate out well the changes that they've been thinking about. And so sometimes when changes happen and why do feel a little bit whimsical at times. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you touched on a few different points. One is kind of that fear around, gosh, does it appear to be too simple? It reminded me of, I was working with a foundation, in the United States, and they wanted me to help them with strategic planning. And one of the things they asked me to do at the beginning was actually to do a environmental scan of how their foundation compared to other foundations in their city. Now, they are a private health conversion foundation, and they wanted me to compare them to the local large community foundation, family foundations, corporate foundations. And I just looked at them and I said, why? And she looked at me and she was like, well, I think it would just be helpful to know how we compare against these others. And I pushed back and I said, to what end? Like, who cares? How could you possibly compare yourself working on in one issue on one community, and you're a certain kind of foundation with a certain history, to this family foundation working on different issues in your community, to this 100-year-old community foundation? Like, you're all different. Like, there's no point to this. It was all fear-based. Like, she just wanted, I don't know, like confidence when she went to her board that she had done her due diligence, she had done her work, or she knew more about herself. And, I could have gotten a $50,000 project out of that easily, but I refused to do it because it was a waste of time and it wasn't going to help her. And it was just going to 6 months delay the strategic plan. Right. And I do think there is that fear, but when you think about simplicity, and in fact, one of my colleagues, he's an IT consultant out of Chicago, Praveen Puri, and he has a concept of strategic simplicity in IT, but it's a really useful concept of like, simple is usually better. I think in philanthropy, we tend to complexify the simple, and we need to simplify the complex, because when you have not a simple strategic plan, because the work you're doing is complex, but it's clear, it's simply explained. It's abundantly obvious when you take a look at the, 1-page document that, it could be summarized in, that everyone understands in your organization what you're working on. The intern who shows up in the summer can quickly get a read on where the organization is going and the progress you've made, as can your donors. It's a great communications vehicle to get your donors on board with where you're headed. They can quickly understand what you're all about, why it's important, that you're focusing on the most important things to get you there. And it's a lot easier for you as the leader to manage that and track progress and make course corrections as you go, because things will change, regardless of how fabulous your strategy is. The world's going to change around you. That's inevitable. And you do want to be able to make those course corrections along the way and be agile, as you said. And in fact, there's a resource that your listeners might be interested in. It's a free download that I wrote about this exact point. It's called 8 Things Every Philanthropist Can Do to Change the World, Even When the World Keeps Changing. And you can download it if you just go to 8things.org. 8things.org. You can just enter your name and email and get it. And it's just it's very practical tips for anyone to think about how do we kind of quickly identify our strategy, identify our top priorities, begin implementing them immediately, and make course corrections along the way. So it offers really practical guidance. So again, that's 8 Things Every Philanthropist Can Do to Change the World, Even When the World Keeps Changing. And you can just go to 8things.org, and it just provides very practical steps I think all of us can use, especially during this time of constant change.
Yeah, it does really feel like there's an upheaval, and it's a weird time. It's a weird time. Yeah. Michaela, I think you had a few questions you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think everything that you've just said is so true, and I think I see it all the time. But for especially young or small developing organizations, I think what you said about getting aligned and having a strategy and not overcomplicating things is really useful for them as well. So I'm just curious as to, have you had any experience working with like very young organizations or with early developing philanthropists, and what are some of the struggles that smaller developing organizations sort of run into when they're just starting out? And how would you advise them?
Yeah, I have worked with very small organizations, and I would say a couple of things. And I think it actually all comes down to a mindset shifts. And really, and one of the things I talk about in the book, Delusional Altruism, is really shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. And that kind of permeates, I think, a lot of what we're talking about, and a lot about what not just nonprofits need to do, not NGOs, but also funders. And so when I say that, I think about, so a scarcity mindset for a small nonprofit could be things like, we're too small to really make a difference. We're too small to attract big donors, big dollars. We might have a big vision, but we can't really, scale. We're too small to have, the right people, the right talent. And it's kind of this, it's based in fear. It's a scarcity of, belief. And so then the decisions you make as a result are, we're going to have only volunteers, right? Or we're just going to ask for, we really need $50,000 to get something up and running, but we're just going to ask for $5,000. And so so you end up kind of cobbling together, bits of money here and there that takes a lot of time to obtain, right, and manage, and then not even having like full-time staff to really support the work that you're trying to do, and a lot of it is based in fear too about like asking donors for money. It can be very fearful if you haven't had that experience. But I think what again, all of us need to do this, is really adapt an abundance mindset that recognizes that the more you put into something, the more you put into your operation and your work, the greater impact you're going to have. And that includes you as a person, as a nonprofit leader, as a funder. And so I think for nonprofits, some of that mindset shift I recommend is, allowing yourself to create that bold vision. Do create that big, hairy, audacious goal of like, 20 years from now, what is the difference? How will the world be different as a result of the work that you're doing today? And really allow yourself to go there. Something that is realistic, like it's doable in 20 years, but it's, pretty like it makes the, hairs on your skin stick up. It gives you the goosebumps, when you really think about it, like motivating, but manageable. So allow yourself to do that, clarify what that vision is, again, so you can communicate that to your donors and others that you want to involve. But again, coming back to, given that's your 20-year vision, like, what does the next year look like? What are the most important things for you to do now in the next 12 months to move you toward that vision? Because it's too easy to just kind of get caught up in the minutia, the day-to-day, computer backups that I have to get through my inbox, all that stuff that just sucks up our time. But also a mindset shift around working with your donors and recognizing that you as the nonprofit are a critical partner to the work that your donors want to achieve, right? The donor, generally speaking, is not doing the work. They're funding the work. So their mission might be ending domestic violence, stopping child trafficking, supporting climate change, whatever it might be. But most of them are not actually, volunteering on the domestic violence hotline, right? They're not the ones that are like, helping survivors of child trafficking get, therapy and job training and housing. They're relying on their nonprofit partners to do that work. And so really, when you recognize that, you see yourself as a core, maybe even the most important part of their mission, right? You're the one making it happen. And so I think that helps you change your mind a little bit when you're asking for funding. And seeing yourself as a peer, as a partner to the donor, and not as kind of a supplicant with your hand out, right? So I think, and so when you do that, I think it's a lot easier to say, well, actually, we do need $50,000, or we need $500,000, not $5,000. And seeing the value that you provide to your donor, to me, that's a really important mindset shift.
I think that's really powerful. And I think whilst reading your book, it seems like a lot of these issues that come up with philanthropy and giving, they're rooted in personal, in how people look at themselves or how a team is. And so as I was reading your book, like obviously the first part was talking about, some of the issues that people face, but then the second part talks about how that transforms. And that sort of reminds me of like what happens sort of like in a therapy session, like you talk about this, but then the therapist offers you a way to transform that. Like, how do you cope with this? And I think that looking within as individually, but also as a team is a really powerful thing. So how would you sort of, or what would you recommend to teams when before anything happens? Do you have any experience with sort of team building and how like a team can get really aligned on what they want to do as a nonprofit or whatever before they do anything? What's sort of your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, team building is certainly important, but to me, a couple of things come to mind. One is, as you were talking, I was thinking about the importance of giving yourself permission as individuals and as teams. And related is also thinking about what's holding you back. And so giving yourself permission to, and that really can range, right? Giving yourself permission to create that 20-year vision. It can be scary. Give yourself permission to speak up at the meeting and share what you're concerned about. Give yourself permission to become the leader that you believe that you want to be. And then think about really what's holding you back from doing that. What's, is it, I mean, truly, like, is there a voice inside your head that's telling you you can't? Is there a person in your life that is, would be hurt or upset if you really stood up and became the person you want to become, became the nonprofit leader you want to become, became the donor you want to become? I mean, a lot of high wealth people, ultra high net worth individuals are fearful of, it being known that they have wealth, are fearful of what others will think of them, are fearful of how it will impact their relationships, their friendships when it's known, and or they're fearful of kind of coming out, if you will, in support of certain causes and issues, because how will others react to that? And so I think it's really important to have those open conversations around permission and allowing ourselves to give ourselves permission to achieve what we want, what we truly want in our life without feeling guilty. Whether it's a big house or it's the kind of lifestyle you want to have, or the impact you want to have on the world, like whatever it is. And not allowing fear and shame to hold you back. And I think, honestly, when we can all have these conversations ourselves as people, as funders, as leaders, as donors, it opens ourselves up to what's possible. But when we can also have those conversations in groups and be open and vulnerable to, what you actually want and what you're fearful of and what is holding you back, then I think that also allows a lot of, support and camaraderie and relationship building among teams.
Yeah, no, Kris, I think you touched on another interesting theme about, we sort of landed on, there's a lot of fear in some of the decisions that are made. And I think that gets into the decolonization conversation as well, because I know as a grantee, you're often afraid to raise issues to your funder, either because something's off track or even to give critical feedback that would improve their giving or would improve how they interact with their grantees. There's just a lot of fear because of the power dynamic, or the fear that the funder is going to take money away because you said, hey, I'm spending a lot of time on this grant report and I'm just curious if anyone actually reads it. And knowing also, coming from both sides, both from a previous job at a funding organization and being a grantee now, we know that not everyone reads it. But I also know how much time I spent writing one in January, and knowing that someone wasn't going to read it was a little disheartening. I'm not going to lie.
Yes.
But being brave enough to actually call that out. This is partially why I wanted to have you on our podcast today and to talk about your book, is just to sort of open up some space to have these kinds of conversations, and hopefully maybe make others feel more comfortable to raise some concerns too. But I think this fear in the power that goes along with the power dynamic is amplified even more when you're talking about countries that are low to middle income and the funder is in a wealthy northern country, for example. So these kinds of power dynamics are exacerbated even more because of the colonial legacy. And so there is a lot of fear in many different forms, in many different ways. There's also fear on the donor side of, well, can we really trust this organization in X country to spend the money appropriately? But I do think, really coming from a more kind of heart-centered place and trust until proven otherwise is sort of some of the principles we're really trying to instill in our organization and working with others, and really trying to create a psychologically safe place to at least air out some grievances, even if they're just with us, and then being able to take that forward and try to push it upward as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, you're touching on really important points. And I think, just kind of a broad umbrella concept of the power dynamic, it's real. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist for sure. I think though, I like that your point of trust until proven otherwise, because, that it just makes a lot of sense to me. I really feel like, but an abundance mindset would say, I believe that this donor genuinely wants to help us. I believe they want to do the right thing. And I feel confident in myself to be able to let them know, like give them a heads up, sort of see this as a joint learning opportunity so that we can, they might not recognize what they're doing and the harm it's causing. They might have no idea that nonprofits spend 40 hours writing a report. Like they just think it, might be like a 2-hour activity or something. And so, kind of seeing these as opportunities for sharing, for learning, for educating, for relationship building, and almost out of like a position of respect for the other person, like to hold back on something and not tell someone the truth is in some ways like almost disrespectful, right? But thinking that this person is assuming that they're smart, they're confident, they're willing to hear and listen and make changes, I think it's kind of the right approach. And you might be proven otherwise for sure, but assume that they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to hear, and they want to build a relationship with you because I think funders are increasingly recognizing that things change, and the best laid plans might fall apart for no problem on the nonprofit's part. The world changes, or 3 key staff members go on maternity leave at the same time, and like stuff happens, right? And you want to have that trusting, open communication relationship with your grantees so that the grantee, the nonprofit, feels comfortable coming to you as the donor to say, hey, things just went off the rails. Can you help me rethink this? Or we have this great opportunity, help me leverage this opportunity. Really the donor, it's in the donor's best interest to have that kind of relationship. And that doesn't happen unless you can each be having honest conversations, asking questions, and offering feedback. And your example is so common, with the reports. I mean, I remember talking with one, a program officer who was of a large US foundation, who was sharing that staff in their organization read about 15% of the reports that nonprofits submit. And then I talked to one of their grantees who said, I spend a week every year, a full week, writing that darn report. And like, yeah.
And the fear that you're getting all the information in it, right? So, it is a two-way relationship between a grantee and a donor. So I think we've talked a little bit about some changes that we can all make, leaving this kind of fear-based mindset and coming from an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. Is there anything that you would say that the grantees also need to be working on?
I mean, I would say for the grantees, it's, a lot of the books, so the book Delusional Altruism was written for the funder, written for the donor, but honestly, everything is relevant to the nonprofit leader. It's funny, my husband, he owns a business. And of course, I made him read the book as soon as it was published. And he was about halfway through and he put it down and he said, honey, I had no idea you knew this much stuff. And I decided to take that as a compliment. But what he meant was like everything I was writing about philanthropy was entirely relevant to business. Right. It's just kind of switching the frame slightly. So I think, in the book, I talk about, shifting from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance, how fear holds us back, how feeling overwhelmed holds us back, and how we contribute to feeling overwhelmed, how we kind of, sort of self-sabotage ourselves, and how we slow ourselves down, but also, how to focus on what's most important, the top questions you should be asking yourselves, how to increase speed, how to add, get time back in your day, literally, and very practical points. And so I think all of these things are really important for nonprofits as well. You referenced earlier what I call mission creep, which is, as funders' interests are changing, maybe by the hour or maybe within the year, it's easy for nonprofits to kind of chase the money. And, and often that's referred to as mission creep. They set out to do one thing, but suddenly funding is available for something else. And now they're doing something else. And so again, I think it all comes down to clarity on what you want to accomplish and then how you want to accomplish it, and asking those questions in that order. So asking the what before asking the how. So, what impact do we want to have? What difference do we want to make in our community? What are the emerging needs? What issues do we need to address within the organization first? And then how do we go about doing that? Because there's usually like 65 ways to achieve the how, right? But you have to have clarity on the what. You need to know your objective before you know the right way to achieve that objective. And I think too often nonprofits and donors, all of us, we kind of get caught up in the how before we have clarity on the what. Like a common one might be around, like, I was actually working with a funder, a small foundation that was kind of sleepy for decades and then wanted to reemerge, and felt like they needed to be on social media. So the questions they were asking is like, should we be on Twitter or Facebook, or what about Snapchat? And I said, whoa. That's a tactic. You might not need to be on any of them. But first of all, like, what do you want to do as a foundation? Then what are you trying to communicate? Like, to whom? What are the messages, right? And only then do you think about what are the right ways to communicate that, right? Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time like posting things on Facebook that no one is paying attention to and is accomplishing nothing. So I think, along with clarity of your strategy, it's understanding your what and then your how, understanding your strategy and then the tactics that will help you achieve that strategy.
I know that I went through a personal experience where I was extremely busy at work. I had a really big pet project I wasn't willing to let go of. My boss actually asked me, do you think that this is maybe overwhelming you? And I said, yes, it absolutely is, but it's bringing me joy. So I'm not willing to let it go. So I'm going to make it work. And he said, okay. And it was through that process, because it was bringing me a lot of joy, that I did kind of get really good at this, not overwhelming myself and not doing the self-sabotage. And when you have to do ruthless prioritization like that, you do really, if you're paying attention and thinking about it, you can really see what falls away that just isn't important anymore, and what you can do that actually moves things forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was probably one of the biggest professional lessons I've learned. I wouldn't necessarily wish the circumstances on anyone, or advocate as a way to learn how to stop self-sabotaging. But I do think it was one of the most valuable lessons to really sort through, like, no, this is noise. Let it go. It's not important. Because you know what? No one's asked about it since. It's not important. Right. Everyone else forgot too. You don't have to remember if everybody else forgot too. And if it is important enough, it'll come back up, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's funny. I know exactly what you mean. And I think, again, that's getting rid of all that clutter, all that junk. I think we toss all this junk in our way, right? If it's your overflowing inbox. I mean, I remember talking to a funder before, right when Donald Trump was elected president in the United States. And, no one really expected Trump to be elected president. Like, Trump didn't expect to be elected president. And so they were about to embark on strategic planning, and they were like, oh, no. We have to wait for the next 100 days of his presidency to sort of find out what's going on. And I said, no, you don't. Like, you're not going to know any more in 100 days than you know today. And it's all going to change. And so they kind of like tossed a president in their way. I mean, like, people just kind of toss junk in their way, and it prevents them from accomplishing what they want to accomplish. I mean, even my book, I was working on the book proposal for Delusional Altruism years ago, and I had, submitted it to some publishers, immediately got either rejections or, no response. And then I just got busy doing stuff, right? Working on client stuff, whatever it is, posting on LinkedIn, organizing my kids' activities, whatever. My day was busy. And then like, I don't know, 9 or 12 months later, I was like, oh yeah, that book. Like I'd forgotten about it, right? And then I thought, okay, let me just shift this. Let me make this a top priority. So I identified my 3 top priorities. Getting the book published was one. I blocked out time on my calendar. Like I got rid of other stuff, blocked out time on my calendar. Every day I did one action to move forward to getting the book published. 5 weeks later, Wiley was sending me a contract to publish the book because I made it a priority and I got rid of all that stuff that was just sucking my time, right? So I think it's really important.
Well, I am glad that you finished the book and published the book. I really enjoyed it. Michaela, did you have any final thoughts or questions?
I think this book is really powerful. There's some really there's like a wealth of knowledge and lived experience in there, and you also provide like so many questions that people and organizations can go through to help sort of steer their way and just get aligned in their minds and as a team as well. So it's a great read, and yeah, thank you so much for writing it.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for reading it.
Yeah,
I'm glad it's helpful to you.
Yes.
I did really like it's very practically written. It's very straightforward. In our field, we deal with a lot of academics or engineers, and academics and engineers are great, but sometimes translating that into language that someone with a lower level education might have, it takes a little bit of work. Academic language is a particular style. More is more. So I did really appreciate how straightforward and practical it was.
Great. Well, that was one of my goals. So I'm glad that was appreciated.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed chatting with you, and encourage anyone who is in philanthropy in any role to follow Kris on LinkedIn. She posts some really great articles. I'm constantly reading them and constantly sending them to my board. So thank you for those as well. They're not a waste of time for anyone. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And folks can find me you can find the book at delusionalaltruism.com. That's also a link to my website. So you'll find how to reach me and all the social media channels there, but it has links to purchase it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other retailers. And on LinkedIn, it's Kris. I think I'm at Kris Putnam on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. And again, that download 8things.org to download that free guide is another way to reach out to me.
Awesome. Great. And we'll make sure, all the links are in the description box.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, enjoy your rest of your day, and thank you again so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.